Welcome back to American Zarathustra for episode 15 of Imperium Art. Today we're very pleased to have a very special guest, someone well known in our sphere and a man who needs no introduction, Jefferson Lee. How are you today, sir?
No introduction. That's very nice of you to say. I'm doing well. I'm really happy to be here with you guys, and I'm looking forward to diving into some pretty deep topics here today. So thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Let's do it, gentlemen.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I'd like to welcome back my friend and co-host, the original warrior poet himself, Nullis. How are you doing today, Nullis?
I'm doing fine. Hi, Donald. Hi, Jefferson. Hi, hello to the audience.
Mm-hmm. So, as we go on with this show, for listeners who are not familiar with our guests, we always like to do kind of a basic introduction. You know, in a sense, the Imperium Art show is a documentation of the arts in the dissident right. And it's not just speaking with artists, but speaking with everybody in our sphere about the arts and how it relates to white identity politics. So, Jefferson, if you could give us a kind of a brief bio and let people know where they can find you online.
A brief bio, man. That's it's a lot of pressure there, Don.
You're gonna have to be very modest, and I know that's not easy. So,
let's put it this way: if you want to find me, there's really only two ways to do it. You can find me on Twitter at Jefferson Lee TV. That's my Twitter handle, at least while we're still allowed on Twitter.
Right.
And I don't really do my own YouTube stuff anymore, but you can find me on the EBL, the Euro Bureau of Literature with Tyler and Josh Neal. We're on Tyler Hamilton's YouTube channel, Thamster. You can find me there. And right now, that's really pretty much it. You know, in terms of my background, there's too much to get into. Suffice to say that, like a lot of us, I'm someone that sees what's going on, is upset by it, and wants to do something about it.
Beautiful. Well, you're in the right place. So for our listeners, Tyler Hamilton has been on several of our shows earlier. So episode 1, 2, 3, I believe. And we will be having Josh Neal on the show, I believe, in October. So if you could talk a little bit about, Jefferson, if you could talk just a little bit about kind of how you had your racial awakening or your red pill. How did you come to sort of waking up and joining the dissident right?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different phases to that. I think if you'd asked me this a year ago, I might have actually given you a different answer. Even though the path would have remained the same. I think that to be from a diverse area in the United States is to be racially aware, even if it is strictly in a negative sense.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if you're surrounded by other groups that are not your own, and the media makes it very clear, even back in the 90s when I grew up, it was certainly less bad, for lack of a better term, back then than it is now, but it was still there. You had a very clear-cut idea of what you shouldn't say around certain people and what was uncomfortable and what would get you removed from higher society and what type of topics you were not allowed to bring up. So I think I was aware, racially aware, as long as I can remember, because this is what it takes to safely navigate a diverse area in the United States of America. And to be honest, when you see all of the discord that's going on in the U.S. right now, I actually see how part of the problem, I mean, there's a lot of problems, but what I find very interesting is how a lot of white Americans who have previously lived in non-diverse areas are struggling to figure out what I learned in kindergarten. And that's just the truth. You know, I'm not saying that I'm smarter than they are. There's just a certain reality to it. Now, in terms of when did I learn that there was maybe a greater history to our people than I had been let in on, that there were other ways of viewing history or other philosophical perspectives. I think my story's kind of basic. You know, I started as a Ron Paul libertarian in 2008 and also 2012 because back then, and even now, unfortunately, libertarianism was the only way that you could kind of resist the status quo without being kicked out of polite society.
Sure.
And so you discovered through that, especially when Ron Paul was bravely pushing back against wars for Israel. He was pushing back against Zionism. He was pushing back against central banking and so on. There were ways of resisting, quote unquote, through Ron Paul and his type of libertarianism, even though it certainly wasn't perfect. But once Ron Paul kind of ran his course, the movement failed. Like a lot of us, I was kind of pulled into Trumpism. I think Trump was really good at building a coalition around everyone from white nationalists to American conservatives to libertarians. I think he had some great people in his corner that were clearly building a proper coalition.
Mm.
I got kind of pulled into that movement, and I started to move away from libertarianism and began to maybe embrace the concept of a stronger state, the idea of an ethnos being important for the maintenance of a civilization in any way, shape, or form. And somewhere along that time, it's tough for me to pinpoint a year. That's when I got turned on to, I think, probably first Nietzsche. And, as I think a lot of us start with Nietzsche because he's such an easy philosopher to read as compared to other people. Then you wind up reading Julius Evola, Oswald Spengler. I mean, of course, the list goes on. And that has kind of led me to where I'm at now. But I think instinctively, I was always this way because I was raised in a diverse area, and understanding that I was not the same as my classmate in the third grade was important because that kept me from getting detention. As ridiculous as that sounds, there's a lot of truth to that,
Oh yeah, for sure. So that's interesting because I think that flows into my next question. Well, what direction are you taking now with EBL? I enjoyed the show you had on the other night with Tyler and Josh. And you guys, by the way, have a fantastic chemistry. The banter, the flow is just really good. I want to strongly urge people to check out Tyler Hamilton's EBL, and it's just fantastic. But where are you going now in your political direction, and maybe even what do you foresee for the coming year?
Well, in terms of EBL, I think you'd have to ask Tyler. It is his show, and of course, all of us, I think we embrace hierarchy here in Dissident Right. So it is far from me to tell Tyler how to run his show. I'm just honored to be a part of it, and I decided to join the show really just to challenge myself and to create accountability, to make sure that I continue to read and kind of grow myself intellectually. I do always read in my own spare time, but the pressure of having a show once a week or a book to read once a month or whatever it's going to be, whatever we're doing, it guarantees some semblance of intellectual progress for myself. And that was really kind of why I signed up to do it. That and the fact that Tyler asked me, and I do think that at least I hope that I can bring a kind of everyman perspective that a borderline PhD like Tyler sometimes, and this is almost to his credit, does lose sight of. I mean, there's so much basic training that a guy like Tyler has in philosophy that it could be easy to forget how much of your audience perhaps doesn't know the basics. And so I view myself as someone who's learning the basics, who's along for the ride, and that's it's an honor and it's a challenge and a privilege as well. In terms of like future or online appearances and what I want to do, it's a tougher podcast than I thought it would be, Don. You're really interesting guy.
We're not holding back any punches here, brother.
Yeah, I don't know. I stopped streaming a year ago, almost to the day. And
we're glad you're back, by the way. I just want to say that on behalf of everyone in the Dissident.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. And I stopped streaming a year ago. There's a lot of reasons. Some of the stuff I told you in private, Don, and that's obviously not going to be made public. But part of the reason was we've built nothing. And that's something I do want to talk to you guys about today, is that we've built nothing. And a lot of people, a lot of brave men who feel very strongly about this situation are going out and they are risking their well-being for nothing. And I don't mean that the cause is unjust. It means that we don't have institutions, legal teams, and systems in place to protect talented individuals. And I'm not saying I'm talented, and I'm more than glad to step down for someone who's more talented than me. We don't have these systems in place to protect people that want to lead a public life and take this fight public in a way that it actually can mean something and get off these internet dissident right ghettos. And you can scream into this, into the void for so long, and you just have to go crazy. And I think that's what was happening to me. Was I felt like I wanted to get out of this dissident right ghetto. I wanted to reach regular people who I meet in my real life affairs, and I understand that they are ready for it. But because we don't have a media apparatus, because we don't have a way to protect ourselves from slanderous, lawsuits and so on, it kind of became disenchanting. Now, am I going anywhere right now? No, I'm glad to be back. But at the same time, that's part of the reason why I left. And that's part of the reason why I don't have an individual YouTube channel right now, is because I don't know if we're ready for putting forth a full frontal attack, if that makes any sense, Don.
Yeah, for sure. Nullis, did you have any comments or reactions to any of that?
I fully agree with that. I think that the biggest challenge right now is to build up institutions of any kind, and legal representation being one of the most important one of them. Some kind of a legal fund, some kind of a defense fund, and beyond that, you want to have more organic, localized kind of real life communities where people can congregate, meet each other in person, interact in a way that's a lot more organic than it is via the internet, well, social media and what have you. So I fully agree with all of that.
Mm. So this might lead well into the next question. So Jefferson, how do you see the relationship, or rather the relation of culture building to the dissident right? Obviously we're related to or working with the White Art Collective, and you had just talked about, we need to build more in terms of getting all this together. Where do you think we're at right now in terms of building our culture and what the arts might do in that regard?
Okay, so I think we're at 0.0, okay? But I think we're all finally understanding that we're at 0.0. I think that one of the problems with 2016 was this false illusion of winning. In terms of, and we discussed this before, in terms of becoming, quote unquote, racially aware or thinking differently, evolving to a type of third position politics and so forth. Yeah, that did come for me post 2016, and certainly the Trumpism had an effect on me. And as much as I hate what Trump has come to represent, I won't deny that movement had I guess you could say, a positive effect on me. But I think that movement gave a lot of people the false illusion of winning. And it gave people the false illusion of winning because the media was willing to give people who could be viewed as our representatives the spotlight in order to either negatively or positively spotlight Trumpism to get him elected in 2016. And it made us feel like we were more relevant than we really were. And instead of using these opportunities to build institutions, to build legal teams, just like Nulla said, and so on, we decided to bask in the spotlight. Well, now the problem is we didn't build that spotlight, right? It's not our spotlight. We were borrowing it from somebody else, and now we're left with nothing. So I think we have to look at ourselves honestly and say, okay, we're at 0.0, and that sucks. But as long as we can agree that we're there and be aware of it, that's fine, and then we can move forward. Now, in terms of the relation, of culture building, I think this is going to be a big kind of jumping off point for our conversation today. The first thing that we need to do if we want to build positive culture is get money. Okay? I think about this all the time. There are talented musicians, guitar players, artists all over the place that are dying to make money doing something greater than what they're doing now, but instead they're doing how to play Eddie Van Halen solo from fucking Jump or something. You know what I mean? It's the same shit over and over again. And it's because big money investors are not willing to invest in guitar-oriented music, which, let's just be honest, for a long time has meant white-oriented music.
Oh, yeah.
And so there has to be a way for us to begin to accumulate funds to where we can make culture and art, be it music, film, paintings, and so on, that better represents who we are and provides a more aspirational type of incentive for our people. But the problem is that how can we bring the next Eddie Van Halen out of the wood, for lack of a better term? Maybe we can pick anyone.
I can speak to that a little bit. One thing is, as a freelancer, I've learned that I have to become a businessman. And you know a bit about that. But I would say most artists, musicians, etc., are almost totally focused on the production of their work and almost not at all about learning business and how to market, do sales, networking, all that other stuff. So it seems really that either we need to find some people, or some people from our sphere should step up as essentially agents or managers. There's really only so much you can do in a day per se. And I think we have incredibly talented musicians of highly diverse musical styles, and it's the White Art Collective is a very, very exciting sphere right now. But yeah, there's that question of, well, we're just doing this out of our love for our people,
Right.
For the movement, etc., to remoralize our movement and energize our movement. But nobody's making any money. We should have our own record label. We should have our own MTV.
Right. And this all requires funding, and it also requires a fundamental change of consciousness. And this is one of the reasons why I decided to walk away for a while by our quote unquote following. Right. Let's put it this way. Do you think that every single attorney who works for the ADL actually believes in the cause?
Good question. Very good
I would say no. Some of them do. Some of them certainly do. Right.
Yeah.
Others got out of law school. They have student loan debt. They're talented. They're hungry. They want to provide for their families, and they take the first job that's available to them. Okay. And we need to understand the way incentivization works for our people. We are a very talented people, obviously. Okay. We have tremendous potential to do great things, but we have to be properly incentivized and given some semblance of security in order for our people to thrive in the means that they're able to. And the problem is I think, Don, you're onto something great here, how could you expect a musician to understand business? I would argue that these are two different types of people.
Exactly right.
Okay. I'll give you an example, and then I'll rescind the mic to Nullis, who needs to contribute more. No offense. You're the man. I'm just saying, I feel like I'm hogging the mic, Nullis.
No, hog it. This is your show. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, for sure. So in the early 1980s, before I was even alive, there was this movement called the New Wave of British Heavy Metal. I'm sure Don knows what I'm talking about. These bands included Judas Priest. Actually, Judas Priest was in the 70s. I mean, early 80s, not early 90s. If I said 90s, early 80s. Okay. Yeah. It had Iron Maiden, Diamond Head, the Tigers of Pantang. There were all different types of interesting bands that were coming over from the UK that were kind of incorporating a punk rock influence with a Sabbath-inspired heavy metal. The most talented band was a band called Diamond Head. Okay. Diamond Head, most people know Diamond Head because Metallica covered so many of their songs because they were that influential. The most successful band was Iron Maiden. Now, why was that? Was it that they were a better band? No. Diamond Head in the early 80s was the superior band. Diamond Head was managed by the singer's mom.
Oh my God.
Okay. Oh, Iron Maiden hired Rod Smallwood, who was a professional manager who took them from nothing to ruling the fucking world.
Yes, yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
This was a band that accepted we can't do it on our own. Okay. We need help. And they hired someone who could give them help. And they were willing to sacrifice for long-term gain. Okay. We can't expect our musicians and our artists, and hell, even me, I view myself as a speaker and as a performer more so than a businessman. I need business help. Right? You know? So we need these types of people in order to reach the next level. And I think there's a lot of talent out there. There are a lot of people who want to hear guitar-oriented music. And I don't know a single white person that looks at, unless they're like totally delusional, very low IQ, or just desperately vying for for social credit, that looks at like modern art and says, "Wow, that's really good." No, they look at what the Romans did, they look at what the Greeks did, and they say, "Wow, that's fucking great." And how far have we fallen? Well, we could do that again, but we need proper incentivization to get forth the best talent to push forward.
Nullis, care to comment?
Well, there's a lot to be said here. I think the first question or the first point I would address would be this issue that Jefferson brought up, which I find very interesting and important, that there's a large segment of the population out there who are working in the business fields of various kinds of industries, who are de facto indentured servants, high amounts of student loans. They're just there to pay off their student loans, start their families, buy a house, what have you, and they really don't want to rock the boat, at least not explicitly. But they do possess a certain amount of interest, some more, others less. I would say that from this larger pool of people, there are definitely quite a few out there that would be very interested in supporting what we would like to do, both from a business point and perhaps even from a financial perspective, if they can. A lot of these people are also kind of put in a, let's just call it a very special sandwich where they can't really do anything beyond their job. So, they might complain when they have beers with friends, but they won't really say anything outside of that. So there's that aspect to cover. And I think that should be, there has to be a way to approach this demographic in a way where they can feel comfortable supporting all these different arts, all these different intellectual movements in a way that minimizes their risk. Because I let's be honest, we're in a hostile environment, so I can understand a lot of people not, we can argue whether or not that's right or wrong, but the truth is that that's how a lot of people feel and think, who might be sympathetic to what we want to achieve. So I think that's an important topic that should be discussed. It may be in another show, maybe here, but I think that it's definitely an important point. The other side is the organization of the arts. And again, fully agree with the fact that we need to separate the business from the arts. There's an organization aspect to the arts that, the promotion of the arts, the contracts that need to be signed, the various kinds of the structures that need to be in place, the infrastructure behind it. And a lot of that is really not artistic, it's more technical. So within the White Art Collective, we've had these conversations actually on numerous occasions on, just to give one example, of production, getting people to participate, not on the front lines as an artist, but more in the production area to help with the production of the various shows that we have on the White Art Collective, or to help artists with their work, to maybe enhance the quality of what they're producing. So you have that aspect of it. But then on top of that, you also have the business aspect, the promoting, the marketing, the financial security that you can somehow achieve. And I would go so far as to address the audience to understand that a lot of the artists, not just in the White Art Collective, but in the Dissident Right in general, are doing this voluntarily. None of them are making any money on it. I mean, very few are, if any. And so there should be a lot more, in addition to the voluntarism that you see from the artists and those supporting the artists, or intellectual movements such as Tyler's program. There's a lot of work that goes into that. And I think that the audience, which I believe is fairly large, I mean, it's not as large as we hope it can be, but it's still, it's big enough, in my opinion, to provide some kind of support. And I would urge the audience to think about that if they really want this kind of content, whether it's artistic content or intellectual content or political content or what have you, that they should really try to provide more financial support. And I think that's something that maybe we can also discuss.
Well, there's a lot that I can add to that. Just for starters, I am selling my work and kind of freelancing within the movement, mainly, offering my services for people, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not impossible to do such things on your own. However, I think we as a movement have to kind of think more collectively in terms of creating platforms and, going legit, basically, not just kind of hiding in the corner. And a lot of that circles back to what Jefferson was saying earlier. I think people just they're so comfortable behind their keyboards, they're just sort of watching it all like TV, for example. But each one of us, I feel, has some kind of responsibility to do something in real life, to actually figure out what your resources and your skill sets are, and do something to, make this movement get off the computer and into real life, et cetera, et cetera.
Donald, if I could I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to also, though, highlight some of the challenges that we also have to be aware of and calculate this into what we can and cannot achieve realistically. So, for example, I always work under the premise, and again, people can disagree with me, but I personally believe that we lost the culture war. I would say that my position is that we have to take a different strategic approach to everything we address. Again, whether it's artistically or intellectually or what have you, we have to understand that we are in a culture insurgence, and we are fighting an enemy that is significantly bigger than we are, has significantly more resources than we do, and also is in a position to marginalize us at the drop of a hat. So we have to keep that in mind. Also, the challenge, at least in the United States, as opposed to Europe, is because in Europe you might have local, national cultural movements. You have that in various parts of Europe where you have concerts, right-wing concerts. You have like nationalist groups getting together, organizing various kinds of, like these picnics and what have you, and camps even in the summer for the youth. So you have many different things going on in Europe that is more difficult to do here logistically, only because this is such a large country. So if you have a group of 50 guys in let's say Philadelphia, and then you have another group of 50 guys in, let's say, Seattle, it's much harder to get these two guys to get together and like sort of come and become 100 guys, or get together for a concert or what have you. Mm-hmm. So it becomes a little bit more difficult logistically to organize things in such a large country. That doesn't mean it's impossible. It's just a different kind of strategic approach. And that's really what I'm trying to get at here. So I'm not trying to blackpill anyone or say, oh, this is it, forget it. But we have to just take a different strategic approach to it.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is, again, another excellent segue. I think what we'll do is get right into the discussion on Imperium Art. So, Jefferson, have you had a chance to look at the essay? What are just some of your general impressions about the project and some of the videos we put out?
I think that the essay is fantastic. And Nellis, I believe you wrote that, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, fantastic work.
Thank you.
But I think this is, and I don't mean this to be too critical, because I think the essay was great, and there's a lot of things that I agree with. But the first thing that we have to kind of grab by the horns here is incentivization. I think there are so many great visions out there. You have one. I have one. Don has one. Everyone's got a great vision. And ultimately, let's be honest, I mean, my puppy who's staring at me right now in the corner, he's got a better vision than what it is, than what the U.S. is right now. This country's a fucking disaster. Let's just call it what it is, right? It's obvious. Yeah. But we have to get down to the very basics. How do we get the best people? And how do we provide safety, security, and prosperity for the most talented people?
Yeah.
And this is not necessarily on us. Yes, we should be relaying this message to our audience, but ultimately we need to, I hate to say this, but we have to start thinking like a diaspora people. We have to start thinking like a minority. We have to do what, I mean, you've seen this movement in diverse areas where there'll be big pushes for Black people to only shop in Black-owned businesses.
Yeah,
I get it. I understand it. They should be doing that, by the way. I applaud that, and I think that it shows courage, and I think that it shows cohesiveness and a strong embrace of racial and ethnic identity. We need to be doing the same thing for ourselves. We ultimately need funding before any philosophical critique of what we're putting forward is relevant. Because the fact is, what I see in your guys' essay, what I see coming from White Art Collective or whatever, these are all infinitely better worldviews or forms of art and so on than what we're living in today. There's no doubt about it. I all day long, I agree with you guys. The fact is, how can we push this into reality?
Right.
The reality is we need funding, because there are talented people everywhere, like you guys said before, who are stuck in shit tier corporate jobs that they actually agree with us, but they're afraid, they've got 2 kids, they need health insurance, and so on. And we have to provide that type of security for these talented people to move forward and express themselves. And this is kind of a refutation of the concept, and we've heard this before, that like demographics is destiny or something. Yes, I do want to live in a majority European society. No question. I think that's true for all 3 of us. But however, we can produce something great as a minority that will push society towards something great and benefit us, but we need talent. And that talent needs to be compensated for their risk.
Mm-hmm.
And I just feel like any other conversation before we get to that point is a non-starter, right? How can we take care of these poets, philosophers, musicians, producers, agents, directors, cameramen, actors, because they're all out there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right? And you know as well as I know, there are people in Hollywood right now that are like, I fucking hate this.
Yes.
I mean, they'll never say it, right? But there are people in Hollywood right now that are making movies that are like, well, I like the movie, I like acting, I like the money, I'll just shut the fuck up and keep going along with this garbage. But if we were able to pay them a lot of money, okay, they would come over easily, or maybe not even a lot, just some semblance of cash so they can support their families or whatever. This would provide for us to have a higher level of talent. And I think that's what we have to push.
Yeah.
Now, I personally, pushing back against a liberal point of view, I don't believe that all revolutions or all changes in thought and so on are bottom up. I do believe that there always is a top-down component to revolution. Always. And make no mistake about it, we need a revolution if we are going to change the what liberalism is pushing us to. There's no question. Now, I do think in order to attract elites, and I think that there are billionaires that agree with us, we have to prove our competence on a lower level. That means bottom-up funding, the production of some type of cohesive hierarchy within an organization that will allow someone to come forward and say, hey, you know what? Your quote-unquote, and this is probably the worst term to use, but I'll use it anyway, your quote-unquote business model makes sense. And we have to do that.
Yeah, I have some positive comments on that topic. I'll first say that I have been telling people for quite a while to treat the dissident right like a business, to start organizing. And in the different social media platforms that I'm on, I find Facebook and Twitter are quite different. But on Facebook, I'm related with groups that are pretty much doing that. These groups are more focused on homesteading, homeschooling, creating breakaway civilizations where they can depend on each other in a tough spot. And they can, in a sense, I don't know if this is the best analogy, but it'd be kind of like our movement being like modern Amish, in the sense that, we're really, really tight communities. Everybody's highly skilled and we're self-sufficient. And that's the idea. Now, there's a lot of thoughts about, well, for or against that, but these are the people that are actually doing stuff. And so I'm connecting with them, and I'm in the process of essentially working up a model for my area where I live. And I've already, so we all know a spectrum of, people from, say, middle of the road normies to MAGA Trumpsters, to people that are, like the libertarians, and then the alt-right, dissident right, etc. So I'm writing up this proposal in a sense where there's an inner core of people that get it, and are looking more towards the future, but that somehow we can bring in others and then grow this community. I haven't quite put sort of worked in like the arts into such a plan, other than this concept of having a monthly convention, what I call a Patriots convention, and that's such a general, safe term to use, So the idea being to find some kind of public space, VFW hall or a convention center somewhere. Everybody do vending events, have speakers, debates. You could imagine, you could sell books there. There's you could do your podcasting from there. I come from like the Comic-Con world, and I look at how rich that culture is in every sense, culturally and financially. And I think, well, why couldn't we do something like that, but with, say, Western civilization as the theme? You see what I'm saying? There could be bands playing there from the White Art Collective. Each, so you could just use your imagination and see how such a concept could grow. And it's not impossible to do these things. You just have to work on a local level. And then I think if enough of us do that across the whole diaspora, you could see how, in a sense, these would be like cells, that all kind of grow. I look at all the Muslims moving into my neighborhood, and they're coming out of the woodwork. They're buying dilapidated homes, fixing them up, and then renting them out to 4 different poor white families. And they're gaining a lot of ground, and it's terrifying to me. So I look at that and I'm thinking, this is a joke. Why aren't we doing the same or better? And again, it comes back to, well, we have to look at ourselves like a minority, which is a horrible thought, but you're so on the money with that. We have to look at how the Democrat Party, although they're very criminal in their means and methods and immoral or unethical in their purposes, but the way that they do fundraising and all that, well, we could learn something from that, but for our sake and for our goals. So yeah, I guess this is kind of a call out to our listeners and everyone in our sphere for basically business leaders to step forward. And go ahead, Nils.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that because I think what you mentioned with the Comic-Con concept, I think that's a very good model from which we could build something organizationally. I think that would be a very good platform to provide proof of quality or proof of concept, if you will, in the business language. I think what we're talking about here is appealing to patrons of high net worth patrons, really. That's what I think, Jefferson, I think that's what you're referring to really specifically. And when you're talking about appealing to high net worth patrons, then what you really need to provide them is a risk reward proposition. So for them, the big question is, if I'm going to invest X amount into this project, whether that's financial, whether that's providing my talent and my background, whether it's also providing my connections, whatever it is that they're providing, they also want to see a reward. Now, what that reward is, we're not talking about profiteering. What we're talking about is reward in the sense of it becoming something bigger, proving that it works, proving that the model works, proving that the business case is viable. And I think that this is really what Jefferson was getting at. So providing a high quality content is one thing, right? So you can have a podcast that shows, that's really high quality, like Tyler's program is very high quality consistently. And I think that's excellent, but it's not a business proposition in and of itself. What we're talking about here is the organization, the infrastructure that supports all of this, and that has to be very strong. That has to be solid. So I think that maybe the audience, people of that background who are very interested in doing this and helping out, I think there's a very strong need in the organization, the infrastructure, the support mechanisms that make up the whole. I think that's really what we're looking at. But beyond all of that, you also need a mission statement, right? So you want to have a mission statement that is very clear on what your goals are, is very clear on how you wish to achieve those goals, and also what you want to what results do you want to bring out as a result of your efforts. And I think that's also something that we need to think about collectively or organizationally.
So I guess people need to step up to the plate is pretty much what it is. I mean, and, artists, again, are focusing on their art. I guess anybody who's listening to this, if you or someone you feel is equipped to do these things and can, then please get get off your butt and get involved in
Get moving.
Yeah. But I think you guys are onto something, and I mean, listen, I think we're all on the same page, the three of us, and that's fantastic. But there's also other obstacles here that we have to discuss, which is, yes, we have to overcome our fake and gay liberalism, get away from the atomistic aspects of our society, and realize that we are. Whether we like it or not, I think that's really important. There's a lot of white Americans out there that are like, I don't want to be white. I just want to be an individual. But you don't really have that choice when the media and quite frankly, also the United States government, both entities of which have more power than you, are calling you a white man. It doesn't matter what you think. You have to respond to the entity that has more power than you. And I think that's also super important. But there's also other obstacles in the way. So before we even get to, hey, upper middle class white guy who doesn't like what's going on, can you give us a couple $100 a month or something so we can kind of begin to build something? That's important. But we also have to look at the harsh realities of financial deplatforming.
Yeah,
this is a real problem because if we begin to garner momentum on anything that is funded by Stripe or PayPal and so on, we're going to be removed, right? So we have to begin to build this stuff from the bottom up.
Yeah,
we cannot take any aspect of Western quote unquote civilization today for granted as ours to use. We can't, even though it makes perfect logical sense that those of us who built Western civilization should clearly have access to these things.
Naturally.
We have to understand these are all occupied by hostile powers. There's no doubt about it. We all understand this. It's absolutely terrifying. And we get this every single day. It's a serious problem. So we need to address the funding question from the bottom up, which is there a way that we can safely accept consistent funding? That's the first thing. And I'm not entirely sure we have that built yet. Is it Bitcoin? Is it Monero? I don't know. That's the first thing. Do we have a way for some patrons to give us money consistently? Because if we don't have that and we're going to have to build it ourselves, we're not going to have the art that we need and the art that we deserve. And I think that's an important thing. A lot of people out there are saying, well, we don't have the talent anymore. We can't get the art done. I totally disagree. Like I said before, there are phenomenal musicians and painters and writers and so on that are just stuck doing shitty jobs every single day because this capitalistic system demands this super horrific entrepreneur of the self where you're just constantly forced to turn yourself into a brand, even though you ultimately create nothing for anyone else in terms of jobs or security and so on. We need, from the bottom up, we need capacity to accept funding. We have to accept that we are at point zero and that we actually have, let's say this scale goes from 0 to 10, whatever. I'm just making this up right now, live on air, guys. We know where we want to be at point 10. Okay, we have this vision already. It's not that hard. What we need to get from 0 to 1.
Right.
And that's, how can we accept funding? How do we get the best of us to step forward and begin to hold them accountable for greater production and creation? We do that with money. Now, I know that it sucks. I don't like capitalism. Maybe you guys disagree. That's all fine and well. I hate this capitalistic system. But I'll say this, and then I'll pass the mic over to you guys. I think probably the first EBL I did with Josh and Tyler, we did 2 different shows on the myths of revolution, and we spoke about what the average American, in particular, thinks a revolution is versus what it actually is. And Tyler had sent me an introduction to a book written by Vladimir Lenin, but the intro was written by Zizek. And one of the things that Zizek discusses is the concept of multiple revolutions before you get to where you need to be. And in particular, it was 2 revolutions. And he was talking about the Soviet Union, but there are other concepts that we can discuss. There's the revolution within the system, and then there is the revolution that breaks the system. Now, we may hate capitalism. We may think that it's demoralizing. We may think that it breaks our very soul, be it whether you're Christian or pagan or so on. It's horrific. I get it. However, the first revolution has to occur within the system.
So how might the arts do that? It seems to me that we are already doing it. The problem is that our reach is only within our own, echo chamber, if you will.
Well, yeah. So when I say within the system, it means that we need money. The American system is based on money and capital, period. Right? So I am admittedly less of a Nietzschean than I used to be, thanks to Tyler. He's had some influence on me in that respect. And if he's watching, I appreciate it, Tyler, or listening rather, I should say. Thank you very much. But there is some truth, and I'm sure other people have said this before Nietzsche, but I'm like, as we discussed before, I started reading philosophy with Nietzsche and then moved in different directions because that's just the way that it was.
Sure.
A lot of people are just going to follow the incentive. And so we need to create that incentive. If someone is going to attain higher status by recognizing that what we believe is true, they're going to do it. But we have to promise them that higher status, and we have to deliver. Now, unfortunately, in this paradigm, and I know I'm sounding a little crazy, might be going nuts. If you guys need me to, if I'm sounding insane, please tell me. But in a capitalistic paradigm, we have to promise money. It sucks. I don't like it. Okay, but we need that money to get the best talent forward until we can break the paradigm.
It seems, just off the top of my head, that the money has got to come initially from within the dissident right.
Without question.
We've got to pool it together. I think, there's so much infighting already that deciding or agreeing on what to pool it together for and how it should be allocated, blah, 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 that could, have some snares in it. But I did want to ask you, do you think there should be some sort of a central control of this? Or do you think, small groups of people can organize? We always tip our hat to Jeff Winston, the creator of the White Art Collective. He's actually gone ahead and created a kind of a sort of a mini YouTube for our music videos, etc. We're talking about some kind of like a Lollapalooza type event for our musicians. There's a great deal of forward thinking. Everybody is just so in love with the movement and our culture that nobody's doing it for money. It's just for purpose and etc. So yeah, I just feel like we've got to connect with the business people in our sphere and somehow work it out together.
Yeah, I think that's ground zero. Unfortunately, again, we are living in a paradigm, and this is a hard thing for a lot of people to accept. You see a lot of people within the dissident right that are very apt. They're very quick to point the proverbial guns at a certain ethnic group that is not white for the situation that we're in, right? And my perspective is that we created this paradigm. The British people, or the Anglos, created liberalism, and they created a paradigm and a civilization and a situation that ultimately was actually more advantageous to other ethnic groups. And now we are living that out. And I mean, I would like to think that we're in the late stages of it, but who the hell knows, right?
Yeah.
I mean, who knows? We can't see the future.
Right.
But we need to understand that we have to incentivize better behavior from our own people. And I don't really. So when we say, hey, we have to have a central point of control, I agree with you. But the fact is, how do we create that centralization? We create it with a way to move up the social hierarchy that is ultimately hostile to ourselves. And this is a difficult thing, because a lot of people will say, oh, well, you're a hypocrite because you hate capitalism, but you're saying that you need money. Well, you know what? You don't. I can hate guns, but I can know that I can't win a war without a gun.
Sure.
Or a fighter jet, or a fucking nuclear warhead or whatever the case might be, right? So we need to meet the enemy where they are before we can change that paradigm.
That's interesting. I think, this is something that is going to require more discussion and more organization. Not because I don't just want to keep spinning our wheels discussing this thing, but you're just talking about meeting the enemy where they are and using these kind of war analogies. One of the topics that we wanted to discuss with you is the concept of martial arts in the Dissident Right, and to try to discover what is the art of martial arts. And I'm kind of taking the conversation in a little different direction here, but it's a good segue. So what is the art of martial arts, and how might that fit into Imperium Art? Any thoughts on that, Jefferson?
I mean, it's tough to say. I think this is perhaps an interesting kind of step back to the concept of British liberalism, Anglo liberalism, and really the only tradition I think that Anglos have put forth over the past century or two that has really made a difference, which would be pragmatism. So I come from a grappling background, in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I've done it for many years, and I absolutely love the art. I love the sport, and it comprises a huge part of my own individual identity. But you're also talking about an art that is based on pragmatically, how do I win a fight? Is there an art to that? I'm not sure. Right? That's an interesting struggle. Are jiu-jitsu artists more concerned with the form or the function? I would say, in my own experience, they're more concerned with the function. Right? And I think that's one thing that's intriguing about martial arts is the function. If you get to a true martial artist, is if I'm presented with a situation, a street fight, whatever, the function is, do I live or do I die? Right. So, we're meeting. This is the ultimate pragmatic question, right? Like, do I continue to exist, or am I dead and my family is on their own?
Right.
It does a lot for the most pragmatic techniques to be produced. Are they beautiful? Sometimes they are. Sometimes they're not.
Yeah.
It depends on our own version of beauty, right? And I think that's another problem another question that we'd have to unpack here. But I certainly will say this. I do think that the people I've met in the martial arts community are the most aware of the problems presented by liberalism. Okay. Even though they might not be racially aware as white people, as Europeans, they are voluntarily engaging in the most illiberal thing one can do, which is we are training techniques that could mean the difference between life and death. And so because of that, we're not worried about inequality. We're not worried about the plight of the minority. We're worried about, does this work? Will this subdue my opponent or not? And so I do think we can meet that community where they are in a very impactful way, because they are every single day dealing with a very primal sense of their humanity. And I think this primal sense is something that pushes back against the type of fake and gay liberalism that is destroying the West.
Yeah. Let me add 2 points quickly to the conversation before we go forward. One is that a lot of people in law enforcement do martial arts, and that's a kind of an aspect or a culture per se. But the main thing is, let's define art simply as expression. So I guess, like any kind of an art, you spend years practicing the basics and learning the whole thing to the point where you can then forget about the technique and just go with the flow. And that's when you're able to use martial arts as an expression of some kind. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that one of the best quotes or whatever that I was ever told as a martial artist that actually kind of I would say unloaded some of the weight off my shoulders, because I'm the kind of guy who's always worrying. I'm always trying to get better. That's good, but it's also bad in the sense that it can stress you out.
Yes.
Someone once told me the weapon chooses you.
Mm-hmm.
And over the course of my experience with the grappling arts, which has been 15 years now, I've learned to really use that quote, and to use that quote to deduce it down to, if a technique feels natural to me, I should base my game and my style on that technique. Okay. If it immediately feels unnatural, I should learn it only insofar as I can learn to defend it. But there is an instinctual drawing towards certain techniques within the martial arts. And I think you're right. I think the weapon chooses you. That's part of who we are as martial artists, right? We discover a weapon, but in a way we're drawn to it from the very beginning based on our personality and who we are.
There's an expression that, I'm not as much afraid of the man who knows 1,000 kicks as I am the man who's done one kick 1,000 times. And it's typical martial arts expression, but and I'll say, coming from a kung fu background, they have you learn all these animal styles, and then one of them emerges as your natural animal. Like, there's just, everybody has one, and a lot of it also corresponds with if you're a scholarly type person, or if you're sort of a playful personality, a jokester. I mean, there's different martial arts for different personality types. So it's quite amazing and fascinating. Maybe there's something of art in that. There's some kind of a psychology or even a spirituality level to that. Nellis, what are your thoughts on this question?
Well, I mean, in many ways, the art chooses the artist. If you become a sculptor, a painter, a singer, a writer, the inspiration chooses you oftentimes. I mean, it's not like I sat down and I said, okay, I'm going to start writing poetry. It's just that that's what came naturally. That's what felt right at the time. And that felt that would be the most effective way of me communicating my message. Now, that ties into my personality, perhaps ties into my past experiences. It also ties into my interests. And I think that as an artist, you also have that element where you can say that the art chooses you as much as you choose the art. And I think that's a nice connection between the martial artist, I think, and the artist in general. But beyond that, I think that there's an interesting connection that a long time ago, I wrote a long thread on folk dance and martial arts. And what I really wanted to try to achieve with that is to show that through folk dance, you will see elements of organic martial arts. And I'm talking specifically about European folk dance and European martial arts, where you would see, and I'm drawing upon my experiences, which is predominantly the Hungarian background, the Central European background. And so I'll use those as examples, but I think that you could find this throughout Europe. It's not unique to Central Europe at all. So, for example, you'll have dances that are called recruiting dances, where historically the army would come to a small village and then they would perform this very masculine dance to entice the young farm boys there to join the military, and it became a folk dance. Or you will have stick dances where men will act out a fencing match through the dance. So you'll have various forms of dancing that you'll see. And if I'm not mistaken, and again, I'm not an expert in the Irish folk dancing, but I believe that, for example, the lack of hands, where you see that the Irish folk dancers never raised their arms, was also kind of a sign of protest, because I think they were forbidden from carrying weapons or what have you. So there's a martial element also to that. So there's a lot of these interesting connections, I think. And where this ties into Imperium Art, to me, would be what I would label as the organic representation of Imperium Art. So that means, and again, this ties into martial arts in general. Not every practitioner of martial arts, not every folk dancer, not every folk singer, folk musician is a part of Imperium Art. But the underlying music, the underlying dance, the underlying melodies, the underlying martial art itself, if it's a European-based martial art, I believe is a part of that organic representation of Imperium art. And to give an example, there's a Hungarian martial art that's been revived. It was, I think it was very popular in the early part of the 20th century and almost toward the mid part of the 20th century. And it was a part basically of the soldiers' training back then. And this training is called Baranta. That's the name of it, or Baranta as the Hungarians would say it. Mm-hmm. And this incorporates archery, fencing, grappling, weapons training of different sorts. And it has even a folk dance element to it. And in addition to that, there's a very, very popular horse archery movement with Kossuth Lajos, or Lajos Kossuth, who's a world-renowned horse archer. He's, I think, even he holds like the Guinness World Book of Records in horse archery, shooting multiple arrows under a certain amount of time, or what have you. And in his training, when he teaches, because he created a whole martial art around horse archery. And so he has various degrees of, and I think he took elements from Asian martial arts in terms of, the various degrees and belts that you can receive and what have you. And he has a very rigorous training program where he also incorporates some folk dancing into it. And the folk dance helps the students develop rhythm, coordination, and agility. And I think that that's very interesting how all of these things are tying together. And because these specific ones that I mentioned, so the Baranta and the horse archery, are very nationalistic also at the same time. Yeah. And so they have a very explicit representation, which I would almost clearly want to say is a part of Imperium art.
There's a million jump off points in everything you just said there. It's very, very exciting. Having studied Kung Fu for 25 years and lived in Asia, I have very, very much to say about it, but I don't want to hog too much of the stage. I do want to just kind of point out a few key points that there's some connection between martial arts and indigenous cultures of the world. So there's, interestingly, in Chinese culture, Native American culture, European, indigenous cultures, there's somehow dance, music, even fashion to some extent. There's some kind of a presentation that it has a cultural dimension to it. So that's something to ponder for future shows, etc. But I wanted to get back to Jefferson and ask a question about how could we, say, take strategy or the art of war from martial arts and apply it to the dissident right?
Well, I think we have to just honestly ask ourselves. Well, I think first of all, the question is, what is our goal? We have to ask ourselves what our goal is and be realistic about it.
Stop
and then
genocide.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. Okay. Yeah. But let's be even more short term,
specific.
Or pragmatic, specific, whatever. Mm-hmm. Because yes, that's fair. We don't want. I would say we want to end white minoritization. We're concerned with being reduced to a minority, not just in the United States, because that there is some truth, and this is horrible, and people will hate me for saying this, but this is what makes these memes powerful. This is what the enemy is so good at. There is some truth to the quote unquote nation of immigrants meme, right? However, it's not stopping in the United States. Obviously, it's going on in Europe as well, which is completely unacceptable, right? So we have to. What are we doing to stop white minoritization? We have to ask ourselves, what's the first goal? Okay, I think it really all depends on where you're at in the fight, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the ultimate question. So
good question.
The art that I know the best would be Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and the two positions that are arguably the worst, the three positions that are arguably the worst to be in would either be someone having your back with both hooks in, someone mounting you, or someone having side control. Pick it. We're in one of those three.
Yeah.
What's the next solution? How do we escape? How do I escape the mount? How do I escape side control? How do I escape the rear naked choke and so on? Mm-hmm. That's where we have to be. we're not at a position where we could be going on the offensive here. We have to be shoring up the defense and being, to use, I think this is a Van Damme movie, but I'll use it anyway. Hard to kill. We have to be hard to kill. Right?
Okay.
So that's where we need to be, and then we can move forward from there. So yes, we can be inspired by the martial arts, and we should be thinking about it, but we should not be falsely assuming a position of power where we think, well, white people have always historically done well, and as such, we're just a step or two away from just, reclaiming the proverbial throne. That might be true in Europe. I don't live in Europe, but I'll tell you what, it's not true in the United States at all. And we have to be honest. So we can absolutely use martial arts principles, but we have to accept the fact that whether we like it or not, we've been put in absolutely horrific positions against our will. And we have to first think about defending, escaping, and then moving forward. Now, a lot of people that are going to listen to this are going to be like, well, that's miserable. That's terrible. I don't want to be the guy that's on the defensive and so on. But I can tell you from experience, the most annoying person that you're ever going to spar with is the guy you can't hit, or you can't choke, or you can't submit. The guy that makes you doubt yourself. Yes. The guy that makes you wonder, what the fuck is wrong with me? I've got this position. I've had it for 10 minutes, and I can't choke him. This sucks. That guy has a lot of potential to turn around and win.
Well, you're striking a nerve here, because I feel that in some strange way, we're not being realistic about our weaknesses. And that's an analogy that's coming out of this conversation, the sense of knowing your weaknesses and playing to your strengths, but also kind of, how do I say, you can recalibrate a situation. You can reposition yourself in a way that's totally unexpected by the opponent. And then that provides you, whatever you've got, have advantage, essentially. So, I don't know, I just tossed this out, like the White Art Collective. Okay, that's, if you look at, say, I don't know, the past 4 to 8 years of the dissident right or white identity politics, I don't really see that there's been anything about the arts, not as much as there is now. So how could this tool be weaponized, say, for waking up more whites? So that's just an application of this concept of martial arts strategy, and how can we, because it's kind of coming from a different angle. For example, we are extremely unapologetic and openly proud to be Westerners and et cetera. And when just normie whites hear it, they're kind of like, what is this? This is a totally new experience. What is this culture? Some people are attracted to it. Of course, they have that inner fear of, oh my God, I'm not supposed to like this, but this is like a little, a thing that I do on the side or whatever. And then other whites are mortified and, oh my God, you're supposed to be ashamed of yourself. But we can use that, say, as a kind of a tool. It's like a different approach to this problem. So, but again, I guess I ran a sparring club for 8 years. Let me just start off by saying that. So I have massive amounts of experience of throwing myself into the crucible and going up against guys that I know could beat me, and then thinking, this guy's a lot taller. He's far more skilled than I am, heavier, whatever, stronger, whatever. So if I identify the opponent's strengths, then I can see the negative space, so to speak, is, well, here are the things. Let's say he has bad footwork. He's overconfident. He relies too much on this particular move, And so if I can always say, get on his flank, I attack his knees frequently, and I can create space. I'm just using martial arts terms and strategy, but I think it'd be fantastic if our movement could think more from that perspective, to do something completely unexpected, kind of blindside them, essentially, come at them from an oblique angle in some way, using some kind of technique or tool that we're not known for. That could be just
to add to that, I think that a lot of this rests with, and again, this is just adding to everything that was said before. a lot of this rests on a realistic, understanding of what our limitations are, what our abilities are, understanding our competencies, and understanding the adversary that you're facing. And that, I think, is a very important step in self-realization in general, but for us as a collective group to understand what we're facing. The other part, which is really important, is also being very honest with yourselves, with ourselves, and saying that we have to understand how did we get here, right? How did we allow this to happen? And when we shift blame, and again, I'm not saying that it's not justified, because it is justified to shift to have there are external influences that have greatly created chaos and destruction in our civilization. And I'm not going to say that that's not true. That's absolutely true. But let's be honest, this would not have happened if we didn't allow it. It wouldn't have happened. Our ancestors didn't allow it, and it didn't happen, and it only happened when we were weak. And so we have to ask ourselves, how did we get so weak? And when we understand this, it's not a black pill. It's more of understanding ourselves, being realistic in assessing where we stand. And then when we have that assessment, that realistic assessment of where we stand, then we can have a point of departure on what we need to build in order for us to succeed.
Bing. That's a good one. Yeah, it's great. I do think that this could be an ongoing discussion. I don't know who in our sphere do martial arts. I'm sure there's a good bunch of guys that do. And I wouldn't want to break down into, which martial art is superior to that. That's a waste of time. I would be more about what can we take from this.
So you're not saying, Donald, that Krav Maga is the best in the...
Yeah.
I'm not going to do this. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done
We're not going to nerd out. We're not going to be martial arts nerds for now.
I'm just kidding. I was just...
No, of course, I get it. Yeah. But I just think it's an interesting analogy, and I think it could be helpful, with Jefferson's background in the martial arts. I suppose there's probably a lot more that we could mine from his wisdom and experience there. I don't know if do you have any further thoughts on that, Jefferson?
Not so much on the concept of martial arts. I mean, I guess if we accept that we're in a proverbial or quite literal fight, we have to kind of view things pragmatically and move forward in a way that honestly accepts our position. But I think that Nullis is on to a fantastic point that I think this entire movement needs to be honest about and accept, which is, why did we let this happen?
Yes.
This is something that really pisses me off, and it's something that I think I did a stream about a year ago. One of the last streams that I did before I was like, you know what, I'm gonna walk away from this for a while and kind of do something else. Is the, for lack of a better term, it's the Caucasian question. You see these annoying people within the dissident right who are like, I mean, let's be real, they are literal white supremacists. They think that white people are the best in the world and so on. But yet somehow they blame other ethnic groups for everything. And this doesn't really make sense to me. Okay? How could you say that you're the best and then say, well, we can't win because this group won't let us?
It's a contradiction.
I mean, come on, dude. And by the way, this is the same mentality that a lot of white Americans get frustrated with black Americans. Like, we're not holding you down. What's your problem?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So we have to look inward and solve this problem ourselves and understand why this happened. And I think Nullis is touching on a phenomenal point. The harsh truth is we have been victims of our own success.
Yeah.
And this is why, by the way, ethnic rivalries still exist within Europe. Because, a couple hundred years ago, the winner of an ethnic war in Europe determined the ruler of the world.
Yeah.
All right? Old habits die hard, my friends.
Yeah,
that's not the case anymore.
Yeah.
Other countries, whether we like it or not, China and Japan have gotten a hold of our technology, the things that we built, and they have become rivals on a racial level. You know?
Right. I think
Well, just to add to that, the Chinese speak of a civilizational struggle. You have even the Indian, the nation of India, right? They speak of civilizational struggles. It's only the U.S. and the whites in the U.S. that don't speak about civilizational struggle, which is really interesting. So when they talk about civilizational struggle here in the West, then they're talking about values. When the Chinese are talking about civilizational struggle, they're talking about the Han Chinese, and very specifically. So it's a much different adversary than like you said, Jefferson. It's a completely different scope and scale as well.
And by the way, I don't know where I read this. This could be totally wrong. So if anyone who's listening to this says, Jefferson Lee's full of shit, you're right. I might be full of shit. So I apologize. But there was someone on Twitter that was posting about this, that that the Chinese government was beginning to bring in people who were, I mean, for lack of a better term, scholars of Carl Schmitt, people who had a deeper understanding of European critiques and European understandings of power and political theology and so on. And they are using that against us in many respects. Yeah. And my problem with the China question, and it is a relevant question, of course, in the year 2020, is that all of the critiques of China that are allowed in proper society are just, they're not liberal enough. China, as I view it, is essentially a national socialist society. They'll fucking do business with anyone if it helps the Han Chinese, right? They have a very strong sense of identity. And if we're talking about Carl Schmitt, they have a very strong sense of the friend and enemy distinction. Make no mistake about it. Okay.
Well, this is part of why I brought up the question of the art of war, and why we should be learning in some sense from them, and our white pride, our European pride doesn't allow us to do that. And it's pride is before the fall, right? So we should be looking at this as a civilizational struggle. I think Imperium Art, that just the word Imperium itself says that, right? Is pointed in that trajectory, and that's something that we're trying to wake people up too. So all this competitiveness in between the European countries, we're shooting ourselves down, allowing our enemies to take more ground. We have to become a collective, a giant European collective across, white globalism, if you will.
Yeah. Well, there's also the question of a sense of destiny, right? If your civilization does not have a sense of destiny, then it's doomed to failure. And if you look at it, and we can talk about a myriad different political ideologies, we can talk about a million different religious traditions or what have you, but ultimately what we're talking about is a sense of destiny. So if you take the Turkish as another example, the Erdogan and the nationalist Turks have basically created a destiny for themselves, whether it's justified or not, whether we like it or not. That's what's going on in Turkey at the moment. India is doing the same thing. China is doing the same thing. To a certain extent, one could argue that Russia is doing the same thing, although I think Russia is also struggling with a lot of issues that are not being clarified yet, but that's another topic altogether. The point at the end of the day is you have Europe, you have the United States, you have the white diaspora, right, or the European diaspora, and there's no sense of collective destiny for any of us. The only thing we have are what they're spewing out as Western values, which is like this amalgam, like this amorphous kind of, it's this weird mold that you can't really touch. You don't really know who it belongs to. You don't even know what it is.
Anybody can be American, for example.
Anybody can be a part of Western tradition or values according to what they're proposing as Western values, right? So in other words, Western values is not a civilizational destiny. It's just this amorphous kind of blob that's out there. And so you compare this and to the Han Chinese is a good example, I think. And then you're asking yourself, well, why don't we have, because we used to have a sense of destiny as Europeans. We don't have that anymore. There are exceptions, I believe, in Europe. Certain nations do have a developing sense of destiny, but very few and far between. And I would say that in the overall scope of, the collective diaspora, I don't think that it's as influential as it should be. But what I do feel is that that's what's really lacking, is this collective sense of belonging, this sense of, the Germans call this really the Zukunftsbild, which is like, the future picture, so that they have a picture of the future. And that ties in also to the demographic decline. If you have no sense of the future, why even have kids, right? Because there's no future. It's a nihilistic kind of mentality that we're living in right now, thanks to liberalism.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Well, yeah, I kind of
went
off
dark there, yeah. But very realistic and very true, and it's all good. I guess where I'm going is, I think the artists have to be visionaries, not just the artists. I think, Jefferson Lee could be a visionary just along with us as well. This is a conversation among our people and everybody.
Well, you know what? To be fair, Don, one of the things that I've struggled with is I almost view myself as having an artist brain. And a lot of you guys, like, I don't write very much within this sphere, but I've always excelled at writing. I view myself as having more of an artist brain than a pragmatist brain. I just also understand that living in this capitalistic world, in this world created by liberal capitalism, I'm stuck with trying to develop skills that I really, quite frankly, absolutely fucking hate in order to be able to provide for my family. Yeah. Right? And this is why I say, from experience, we need proper incentivization for more talented people to move forward, because there are a lot of people just like me that don't want to do what they're doing, but they have to because they care about their children, or they care about their wife, or they don't want to be a deadbeat dad, or all valid reasons, and so on. So I think I personally view speaking and writing as a form of art. I've always hated drawing. I've been a terrible artist in that respect my entire life. The first time I was ever forced to paint something, I fucking hated it. I'm terrible at it, but doesn't mean that I don't.
Because I wasn't your teacher, that's why.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I think you could have made something better of me, Don. But the fact of the matter is,
I know I could.
The fact of the matter is, I never had that luxury.
That's fine.
But the reality is, I have always viewed myself as having an artist brain. If I write up a social media post, I'm thinking about it from how does this sound artistically, not from what will it take to reach the most people. I always think about how does it sound artistically. So I understand you guys on that level,
for sure,
right? Even when to kind of circle this back to martial arts, I hate to say this, but to a certain extent, I would rather lose beautifully than win ugly. And that sounds terrible, but it's true. That's how I view jiu-jitsu. Right. So I understand where you guys are coming from, but I think that Nullis is onto something great here, which is that liberalism has poisoned our people and it's ruined our sense of destiny. There are a lot of critiques that float around in these circles. You have the pagans versus the Apollonians versus the fucking Christians. No offense to Christians, because I was baptized Catholic and I get it. But all of these people, when they were, I don't know, in their original form, had a form of destiny.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, European colonialism, starting in the 1500s or whatever, was based on spreading Christianity. Yeah. It was part of who we were, whether we like it or not. It's not relevant right now, right? But it's true. But it's certainly true. I think I struggle with this concept: destiny versus survival. Are they the same thing or are they different? I don't know. A big part of me says we have to focus on surviving before we build up a sense of destiny, and then another part of me says there's no survival without destiny.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Extremely stimulating conversation, because that's the stuff that I grapple with. I feel that they're hand in hand essentially. But the question sort of remains: kind of what is our destiny? Who dictates that? We can criticize, whatever, postmodernism and capitalism, et cetera, et cetera. But we're in this situation right now. For me, I feel that the Imperium is the destiny, that white globalism is the destiny, in the sense that we become who we are. We become one whole family. We recognize who we are as Europeans, the totality of our history, both pre-Christian and Christian, everything in the whole package together, and say we are a great people. This is our DNA, and our DNA is our destiny, and we can't be anything other than great. So, but we're doped up, we're drugged up, we're caged, we're chained. We have all this shit on us that has to be fucking destroyed and taken away. So, that's the analogy in the artwork. The first artwork I did with this giant kind of Apollonian god that has this tree grown all over him, and he's encased in all these vines, and there's all these little symbols in the vines if you look closely, and he has a giant sword, and the church is burning behind him. There's babies being sacrificed, to Moloch, and he's just becoming aware of, like, my God, I have to become who I am. I have to, in a sense, exercise my destiny. And by going, it's weird, by going to the past, we can move forward, but we have to know our past. We have to realize who's stolen our past, who's reteaching it to us through Netflix and and the garbage in the universities and these kinds of things. So obviously I'm very passionate about it, but I kind of feel that it falls on the shoulders of the artists to perceive this, to kind of emote it, to, in some weird way, go into the underworld of our collective mind, per se, and find something to bring back, and then create art about it. And that those symbols show us who we are. When you walk into a cathedral or even an art museum, you suddenly have an amazing reverberation of your being into history, and there's something there that only people of European descent can actually feel. Asians love to go, say, to Europe and check, and they admire that because they come from a great civilization with an ancient history and a sense of destiny, a civilizational struggle, and if we go over there, we can feel the same thing by looking at their architecture, et cetera, literature, all these things. So I don't know. I feel that's anyway my reaction to this discussion and these things. Mm-hmm. But I do kind of wonder how do scholars in the dissident right play a role in this? How can scholars and artists work together to solve these problems?
Well, if I can interject, Donald, I think that at least in the essay, I address certain points I think that might be relevant to this, which is where I describe the Imperium as this existential plane of reality, you can say, where all of us from the European diaspora, where we can congregate, where we can meet, where we can find ourselves in the Imperium as where we can learn from each other, grow together. And I think that's a good way to look at it. So my hope always is that we try to focus less on our divisiveness and more on the synergies, and where we're looking to find places where we can come together and become stronger together. That's not to say, of course, I mean, I am, and I've always said this in every stream, and I say this everywhere, I am at my core a nationalist. I am at my core a Catholic, so I stay with both of them, and I have my criticism, in with regard to how certain levels the institution has declined over, the Catholic Church in particular has declined. So it's not without its criticisms, but I do still believe in that as an overarching theme. For example, at least for myself, that I think that it connects with me. I find it to be a very uniquely European kind of Greco-Roman tradition that evolved over the centuries, and there's a message there that's very important, I think. With that said, of course, I don't dismiss or I don't want to exclude those that don't agree with me there. So I find that the Imperium is a good place, this existential realm, so to speak, where we can congregate, where we can say, all right, I get it. You're the guy that you think this way, the other guy thinks that way, but let's get together. And again, I'm going to use the analogy I think that we've used several times before, Donald, where that painting, and we have to get that painting somehow. I'm not going to push you on it, but I'd love to see that painting one day where you see, the Viking berserker, the
it's coming.
the horse archer, the Templar knight, all these different warriors from our culture sort of rushing towards us, and that rush gives us a message that they're waking us up to say, guys, we have to do something together, because if we don't, then we're going to fall apart. And so I think that's where Imperium Art can provide an excellent message for people, where you can be who you are and express your unique cultural identity, yet still feel that you're a part of this greater family.
Beautifully said. Well, last question for you, Jefferson. I know this show could go on and on. We try to keep it under 2 hours. I did wonder, did you have any critique of Imperium Art, or areas that you feel are vague or need clarification, improvement? Any thoughts?
All I'll say is this. I'll ask you a question real quick, Don, and Nellis as well.
Mm-hmm.
You a fan of Slayer?
I don't really know Slayer very well. I'm not as versed in the heavy metal stuff as you. I'm definitely a guitar rock guy, as you obviously know, classic rock and that kind of thing. And that overlaps into hard rock and speed metal, punk, all those other type things. Sure. But I can't say I'm super familiar with Slayer, though. All right,
so I had a conversation with a guy the other day, a friend of mine. He's a Gen Xer. I'm a millennial. We were talking about music, and there's a Slayer song. I believe it's track 4 on the album "Seasons in the Abyss," called "Expendable Youth," and it's a great song. It's a great Slayer track. And this guy said to me, and this is someone who is a rock music connoisseur. He said, "If Expendable Youth came out today, it would be the best song in the world." And this is a song that no one thought twice about in 1990 when this album came out.
Yeah.
Unless you were like a hardcore, Slayer fan or heavy metal fan and so on. And what I found very interesting about that is this is a guy who, like a lot of white Americans, is waiting for great art.
Right.
And really the question is not how do we create the demand? The demand is there.
Yeah, big time.
Okay? The question is not how do we create the demand for a great Scorsese-esque film, right? Because the demand is there.
Sure.
The question is, how do we get the talent to come forward? And I believe I've stated my case here.
Yeah.
How do we get the funding?
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
I'm a millennial. I'm born in 1986. All right. I grew up going to heavy metal concerts, and one of the things that I noticed starting to go into shows in the late 90s and early 2000s was there was no replacement for the bands that I loved. They just died. It sounds terrible, but it's true, right? But me as a millennial, everybody was ready for that replacement. They were ready for Metallica 2.0. They were ready for Pantera 2.0. They're ready for Led Zeppelin 3.0, because I believe there have been great bands since Led Zeppelin. How do we incentivize these people to come forward? Because I do believe the talent is there. I believe in ourselves. I believe in our people. And I'll go to my grave believing in the European man. The question is, it's the funding question. How do we get people to come forward and express these ideas in a beautiful way, in the likes of which the three of us have never possibly imagined? We have to make it worth their while. And that sucks. It sucks because we don't want to think of doing things for money. None of us want to think that we're mercenaries and so on. But like I said before, there's the two revolutions. There's the revolution within the system, and then there's the revolution that overthrows the system. How do we get to the revolution within the system? That is our first step. Okay. Next step is how do we overthrow the system? That's great, and I'd be more than happy to pop a top on a beer with you guys when we get to that point. But the fact of the matter is, we're not there yet. We're not there yet.
Yeah, we have to establish internal structure. Like we don't have really any of it other than.
So the white pill here is that our people, they know deep down, all over the place, that rap music is not for them.
Yes.
They know it. You know, they accept rap music or whatever on some level because it's all that's out there. And in fact, I'll say this, I know a lot of white Zoomers that are into rap music only because it's the only acceptable form of masculinity.
Right.
In modern day society. These are the same guys that if this was 1989 and they saw James Hetfield with that white Explorer guitar, okay, in front of those Roman columns on the Damaged Justice tour, would have punched someone in the face in a mosh pit. They would have been. They fucking would have been there, right? So our people are ready for this art. They're ready for it. The question is, how do we fund it? How do we get to that next level? And how do we meet the demand that they are desperately yearning for? Okay, and we I think we kind of touched on this before. Everyone is there are actually no, we didn't touch on this, but this was in the Imperium Art essay. I apologize, guys. There are sequels everywhere. There's like Terminator 9 or whatever.
Right.
You know, whatever the fuck we're up to. People want to watch Terminator 7 or Terminator 9 because it's the last time there was a European man directing a movie with a European guy being the lead in the movie with a European writer and a European producer. They are ready for it. It is on us to figure out the logistics. Everybody wants to be a hero, including me. I wish I could just step into the role, get in front of a mic, pound on the podium, and get everyone to go fucking crazy like Stone Cold Steve Austin or something, right? Or Ric Flair.
I'll start the script with you as the star right away. Okay.
Oh, that's fantastic if you know us, but I'm getting a little too old, man. I'm in my mid-30s. I don't know, bro. I don't know if I have it. I don't have time.
There was I don't know how much I can say about. There was a kind of a joke I had with our friend Mark Brahman about me creating a graphic novel of characters in the Dissident Right, but it being something like Ocean's 11 or something like that, or slick cars and nice suits and always getting away and having the girl and all, just to present us in that kind of James Bond light. And it was just a big lark. It was,
Donald, I just to interrupt again. We do have to have that conversation on sprezzatura. We'd have to have that conversation. But all joke, no. But in all seriousness, dressing and fashion makes that's an important conversation. An expression of masculinity. But what I did want to say is that just as just to add to what Jefferson was saying, that we do have really excellent artists in the White Art Collective, I think, and I also believe that there's a lot of great work being produced now as we speak. But the biggest issue is the promotion, and as Jefferson, as you rightly pointed, the funding, the organizational infrastructure to promote this to a broader audience, because all of that costs money. It's not just like marketing something is for free. I mean, you really have to spend money to basically broaden your message. And I just wanted to take my own personal position on this as a creator of sorts. When I write, when I'm doing my poetry cast, when I'm writing something, whether it's a poem or something else, my real motivation and goal there is to try and motivate somebody who's much better than I am, to motivate somebody who's more talented than I am, somebody who has more to say than I do, so that person can take the reins and really push this all the way. So again, but I with that said, I'm speaking for myself there. I would want to add, though, that for the audience's sake, that please tune into the White Art Collective. There's a lot of really good content there as we speak.
So Jefferson Lee, thank you so much for joining us today. This is an incredible conversation, and we hope to have you back on the show sometime.
Yes.
It's my pleasure, guys. Quite frankly, I'm sorry that it took so long for me to come on. I think all three of us are, pretty much on the same page, and we got to move forward, right? There's no other way. We have to accept where we're at. We have to move forward and understand that we as a people have a lot to offer. We have to find a way to pull the best of us out of the shadows and into the sun.
Right.
And that's who we are.
Well done. Well done. And on that note, we thank everybody for joining us for this amazing show. Please check the links below and leave a comment, share with your networks, and please get involved. So everybody have a great one, and we'll see you next time.